I think I can do this and not embarrass myself too bad. My name is MaryAnn Tulsa, and I'm an alcoholic. My last drink is September the 2nd, 1977, and for that I am extremely grateful. As I said at the workshop I did, don't any of you young people come up and tell me that I've been sober longer than you've been alive. It doesn't make me feel good. I want to thank everybody that's been involved with this. Thank you, Art, for where to go to, for helping me get up the stairs. There he is. Thank you, Art. And I'd like to thank Cookie and Stan. I really can't tell you. Cookie and I were talking about it's like we've known each other forever. And that's what you find in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, we're all misfits. And we have seriously wandered around the face of the earth looking for our own kind. And we finally found our own kind, and we're not alone anymore. As Marty Mann said, which was one of the first women who got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, who founded the National Council on Alcoholism, and who wrote Women Suffer Too in the Big Book. When she went to her first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, she went back to the institution where she was, and she said to them, "We are not alone anymore." And that's what I'm here to tell you tonight, is we are not alone anymore. And that is the greatest gift that God has ever given me. The speakers have been magnificent. I know a lot of them. I just cannot tell you what a grand job that has been done. You know, if you pick the right speakers, what happens, and it doesn't have anything to do with the person. It has to do with their sobriety. And what happens is you end up with a mosaic that we're all different. And what we've done is we've painted you a picture. What we've done is we've painted you in the corners, what we've done, so that you cannot say there's not somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous that's like me. And they have done a magnificent job of doing that. It's just I'm going to tell you what I was like. Well, I know you don't like to be corrected, but it does say what we were like, what happened, and what we were like today. And why I don't say it is because it is always the same. It is life. And life will eat my lunch every single time. It is how I handle, you know, some wise man was retiring from being a philosophy teacher, and he was being interviewed about his life. And he said, "My life has just been magnificent, except for the interruptions." And he said, "Then I realized that the interruptions were my life." And that's what this is all about. The good times, the bad times, how do we get through them? The ups and downs, and that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is all about. What I was like is, I was always referred to as "she's been drinking." It didn't matter if I was at a Sunday school, or if I was the brownie leader, or if I was at the grocery store. I was always "she's been drinking." And they would say things like, "Don't pay any attention to her, she's been drinking." Or the one that used to really make me mad is, "What are we going to do with her now that she's been drinking?" And what I wanted to be was someone who was eloquent, someone who could stand up and make their point in life and could convince you of something that you really didn't believe in. I wanted to be that persuader, that great persuader. And what happened is, what I really wanted was to be in those fights with my husband and win. And what would happen is I would get drunk and I would cry. And I would lose my total effectiveness. Well, I want you to know that in Alcoholics Anonymous, and by the way, if all of a sudden I get one large breast, I'm wearing shoulder pads. Anyway, there was a hair her, but she really is my heroine. And she works for the airlines, and it was one of those days where they were having weather trouble, and the planes were being backed up and canceled, and much like when Gary was trying to pick us all up, everybody was late and it was all screwed up, and everybody else had to be rebooked was standing in the line very nicely, waiting their turn. There was kind of a slow mumble, but not much. Well, there was one man, and he wasn't having any of it. And he went up to the counter, and he pounded on the counter. And this airline reservationist looked at him, and he said, "Do you know who I am?" And she never blinked. She reached underneath the counter, got a microphone that went all out over the airport and said, "I have a little lost man here who doesn't know who he is." And most likely, he was a member of AA in training because he wasn't through. And he said, "Lady, screw you." And she said, "You're going to have to get in line for that also." That's what I wanted to be like. I wanted to be like that, to be quick. And I wasn't quick. I suffer from every ism there is, but primarily my major problem is alcoholism. My father was an alcoholic. My father sobered up in Alcoholics Anonymous. I married an alcoholic. I gave birth to an alcoholic. And I have a grandson that I'm praying for all the time. My father could use up a month's supply of anything in 3 hours, and so can I. It doesn't make any difference what it is. If I like it, Katie, bar the door. What else? I have some really good news for you and some really bad news. First of all, the really good news is Alcoholics Anonymous works. Period. It works. Cersei, who was the longtime member in Texas who died about 2 years ago, was a good friend of Bill Wilson's. And he said, "Bill, if you could change anything in the big book, would you change anything?" And he said, "Yes, I'd change one word. Instead of rarely, I would put never. Never have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path." And that's what I believe in. I believe that if you do this to the best of your ability, you will be given that magnificent grace of God. It will be, it will be bestowed upon you in a way that is unbelievable. The very first international conference I ever went to was 1980 in New Orleans, and somebody else referenced that. You all get ready, because it's going to be in San Antonio, Texas in 2000. And it's a wonderful thing to do. Well, New Orleans in 1980, there were like 45,000 members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and now I'm wandering all over New Orleans, and the mayor of New Orleans was giving a press conference, and there was this pesky reporter that was hogging all the questions, and he would stick the microphone underneath the mayor's face, and he'd say, "Mayor, how are we going to feed these alcoholics? Once they sober up, they turn into great little eaters, and how are we going to feed them all?" And the mayor would answer that as best he could, and then finally, the reporter asked him, "Well, I hear they're very erratic. How are we going to move them all around?" And he answered that, and finally, he asked the mayor this one last inane question. He said, "Mayor, do you think Alcoholics Anonymous works?" And the mayor said, "Son, this town is in big trouble if it doesn't." And I am here to tell you, AA works. The bad news is this: to really get sober, and I do not mean just cease drinking. I mean to be sober takes a long, long time. It was explained to me that sobering up is kind of like being kicked to death by rabbits. It takes a long, long time. life was obviously skewed. And if I looked at that pink flamingo and it was green to me, I would argue until Hades froze over that it was green. And that's the way I saw things. You could put a lie detector on my finger and I would pass it saying that was green. Much like a little girl by the name of Mary. And Mary lived on the farm and her mother was pregnant and the dad was out doing what farmers do. And it was time for the baby to be delivered. Well, the mother called the doctor. She couldn't get into town. So the doctor came out and he was going to deliver the baby. Well, the lights go out. And he has to have somebody hold the flashlight while he delivers the baby. And so he has to press little 5-year-old Mary to hold his flashlight while he delivers the baby. And what happened is the baby jumps out and the doctor gives it the perfunctory swat on the rear end, wraps it in a blanket and puts it on the mother's chest, and then he turns to the little girl and he said, "So, what did you think of that?" And she said, "I'd have slapped her again. She never should have crawled up there in the first place." And that's what, if I saw things a certain way, that's the way it was. And that's the way Mary saw it. My dad, I told you he sobered up in Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was sober. But he had been drinking for a long, long time, and he had injured his body terribly. He had abused his body horribly. My dad was 46 when I was born, and my mother was 40. In today's society, that is not that old. But when I was born, and I'm not going to tell you how long ago it was, I will give you some hints, and you'll be able to figure it out if you're really good, while I'm not going to do what you did. My mother and dad hadn't planned on having any children. And my mother told me of the many abortions that she had. And I was really a tumor until I moved. And what that did when I heard about that was begin that terrible journey of there's something horribly wrong with me. Little did I know that I was on my way out of the birth canal to a bar, but I was. I was the only child. I was a terrible child, just horrible. You can well imagine. If you think I'm dramatic now, you should have seen me when I was 5 years old. I mean, it was bizarre. You never knew what I was going to do. You just never, ever knew. And everything centered around me. I told him yesterday about a party that I had gone to when I was 5 years old, and the birthday girl got to wear a long dress, and I had this stupid pinafore on that had the tails down the back, and Vinoy and I talked about it, where if you didn't hold the tails up when you went to the bathroom, you had those wet tails hanging behind you. Well, they took our picture, and I had that picture, and you should see the look on my face. If I had a hatchet, I'd have cut that birthday girl's head off, because she was getting more attention than I did. And so what happened, my mother said, you know, your father's very sick, and it's going to be our job to take care of him. Well, I'll tell you, I was not long on doing stuff that wasn't fun. And so at the age of 15, I made a very mature decision, and the mature decision was that I needed to find a mature man. That's what I needed, was a very mature man, somebody who came from fine background and who was well educated and had a bright, brilliant career ahead of him, and someone who would take me down this wonderful road of success. But he had to be mature. And so what I did is I found that man. He was 16 years old, and at the age of 15, I gave birth to my first child. And they placed that child in my arms, and I had never, ever held a baby before. Never even held it. And 3 thoughts went through my mind at that time. I'm very frightened. I'm going to be the best. And I'm not going to ask anybody for help. So you see that I am an alcoholic waiting to happen. The first drink, I don't know how many of you, I bet most of us in this room can remember their first drink. If you are a real alcoholic, you probably can. Now, in Oklahoma we have tests, but I'm sure Florida is very far ahead in the treatment of alcoholism, so you all probably know about this test. What this test is you take 3 people. One is a non-alcoholic, one is a hard drinker, and one is an alcoholic. And you sit them at a bar and you give them a glass of whiskey with a dead fly in it. And the one that's the non-alcoholic goes, "Oh no, I don't think so. I'll just take a Diet Coke, please." And the one that's the hard drinker will push it back and say, "Look, empty this out. Give me a fresh glass of whiskey." And the alcoholic has the fly by the nape of the neck and is shaking it, saying, "Spit it out, spit it out, spit it out." That's thirsty. Give me mine. Mine. It's all mine. I'm first. You're last. I'm first. I'm the most important person. Get out of the way. My husband and I, on paper, we looked like the wonderful young couple, this crazy couple of teenagers who had this baby. I tell my daughter all the time that her guardian angels worked overtime. Bob wanted to be a cowboy. I had never been west of Kansas, and at 15 he takes me out and we're working on a working cattle ranch, and I'm cooking on a wood stove. And I have no idea about high altitude cooking, and so I buried a lot of things in the snow. And then he decided he didn't want to do that, and we started our career. Now I am, remember, an alcoholic waiting to happen. And as a young couple, there were a group of us who got together and we pooled our money. And I had tequila. And you know what it did for me, don't you? It took away everything. It took away stuff I didn't even know I had. And it made, most of all, it made you nicer. You know, this world is a cruel place. There are a lot of bad things that happen in this world. And there are a lot of unkind people. And it made it okay. And I had a secret. You know, I sobered up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I sobered up with steel workers. And they bellied up to the bar. And they drank shots and beers. And they lost families. And they lost jobs. And they wrecked cars. And they divorced families. And they ended up in jail. Well, I'm a suburban housewife. I didn't do any of that. That wasn't me. So I decided that I would embellish my story. I don't know if we have any embellishers around here, but I decided I was going to make my story a little more interesting. And what happened is a fellow by the name of Nick Footish came up to me and said, "Doll, you better start to tell your own story." And so I'm here to tell you I'm painting some woman in the crack right now. I believe in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe in conference-approved literature. I believe that the answer to every problem I have can be found in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous or the 12 and 12. Not only the problems, but the good times can be, that I can learn how to handle the good times by reading these books. And I kept thinking, maybe I'm not a real alcoholic. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe that's it. And then when you read the book, it says, what about the real alcoholic? And it said, and this is the word, read the black. Read the words, all right? Don't detract, don't add. It says, what about the real alcoholic? At some time in his drinking career, here's the operative word, he begins to lose control. So now I got my ticket stamped. I am a full-fledged member of Alcoholics Anonymous because I now say I am. And I can remember I would come in and say, I would overindulge. I got a little tipsy last night. I was I partied just a touch too much. And they said, "MaryAnn, you were drunk." Now, there's all kinds of shows on television. There's comedians all over the country who make jokes about drunken men. There's not one about a drunken woman. And there's not one about a drunken mother. That is a special cross that women and mothers in Alcoholics Anonymous have to bear. There are no pictures of a drunken mother with little children around her ankles. None. And so I remember thinking, well, I wasn't too bad. I wasn't too bad. But let me tell you, God gets you ready to handle things before He reveals them to you. I would listen to these steelworkers talk about how they stole things and how that they were thieves. And I remember, there's a line in the book called Silent Scorn. And I would look with silent scorn down at them and think, I didn't steal anything. And at 2 years sober, all of a sudden, I remembered. We were living in Bethesda, Maryland, and my son was 13 years old and my daughter was 15. Do you all know the vulnerable part that goes on at that age, how vulnerable they are? My husband and I were having one of our arguments, one of those arguments, those arguments. And it was about my drinking, and we lived in a split-story house that had these half flights of stairs, and I remember thinking, I have got to do something to change the tone of this argument. And I thought, I'll just throw myself down that half flight of stairs. But I had to figure out how I could do it, and it wouldn't hurt me. So I finally did, and I tumbled down this half flight of stairs, and my 13-year-old son came out of his bedroom with tears streaming down his cheeks. And my 15-year-old daughter came out of her bedroom, and they're looking at what has just happened. They have no idea what they've seen. They have no idea if their drunken mother has just fallen down the steps one more time, or that the father has pushed the drunken mother down the stairs. Oh, I stole. I stole. I was a thief in the night. I took from my children. I stole a happy home. A home is supposed to be a haven. Somewhere that you can go to get away from that cruel world outside. And I stole it from these two children, from these two human beings. And I know now that if I stay sober for the 500 years, there will still be that horrible feeling of what a thief I am. And I am going to be held accountable for that. I know today that I didn't do it right with my children. But by gosh, I've got a second chance with my grandchildren. And that is the blessing of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm going to get sober real fast because nobody would be standing up here like this if they were not a real alcoholic, okay? So I know how to drink, and you all know how to drink. And I did all kinds of goofy things. I was one of those people in your home group that they called us get the net people. It was like, get the net, don't let them talk. And I would share it with them, and they would talk 2 or 3 times. And finally they'd say, thank you very much, next. And, I have lived through the most magnificent meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm going to tell you how I got sober, but I'm going to tell you, what hooked me about Alcoholics Anonymous? I used to watch soap operas. In the last almost 31 years, I haven't watched a soap opera. Why would I? I live in the middle of one. I used to say, I'm going to meetings Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And Monday night I'd say, oh God, I got to go back tomorrow. I got to see if Ted and Carol got back together. And then Wednesday night I'd say, oh, I have to go tomorrow. I have to go see if Carl got a job. And then on the weekend I'd say, I'm not going to go. Oh, I have to see if Eric got out of jail. So whatever it takes to hook you into Alcoholics Anonymous, God uses. I was just fascinated with you people. You all were the craziest bunch of people I've ever seen in my whole life. Now, I'm a suburban housewife. I'm a brownie eater. I go to church. One of my best friends in Alcoholics Anonymous was a woman by the name of Liz. And Liz was a prostitute. She was a streetwalker. And I was fascinated with her. She would tell jokes and everybody would go, ha, 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 and I'd laugh too and didn't know what the heck she was talking about. And then I'd go home to my husband and tell him the story, and he wouldn't know what they were talking about either. So we were these young kids, and so I would sit next to Liz and I would look down at her hands. And I'd think, oh my gosh, well, she's had her hands. And then I'd think, I wonder if she'll teach me what she does with those hands. Now, you all sent out a letter about profanity, and I'm only going to use 2 words of profanity. But there's just nothing else that will fit, because this is a true story. And Liz said that her alcoholism sat right on her left shoulder, and it was always there. And her alcoholism would tell her, you don't need to go to that meeting. You don't need to get a sponsor. You don't need to tell the whole story. You can skimp on that step. That's her alcoholism, and it's always there. Trust me, it will always be there. And then, of course, your sobriety's over here, and it's saying, don't pay any attention to that alcoholism. You go to the meeting, you tell them the truth, you get down on your knees, you pray. And she said, you know what? I had to give my alcoholism a name. I said, you did? What did you call it? And she said, it's that motherfucker Leroy. So, I told that story in North Dakota, and there was a signer over there going like this way. She's going like this, and on the front row was an American Indian, a native person. He jumps up and comes up to the podium. His name was Leroy. So I have to be real careful when I say that. I hope there's no Leroys in here. By the way, I need to say happy birthday to Joe. For Joe's birthday, he gave his wife a registration to this convention. That is a very subtle way of saying you need to go to more meetings. So, happy birthday, Joe, wherever you are. I'm getting worse and worse, and I'm drinking every day, and I'm hiding it in my purse, and both kids are grown, and my daughter's gotten married, and my son is in school, and my husband is on a long trip, and that's when I loved it. Ooh, you know that. That's when I could drink the way I wanted to. And I could relive all the times that I had been harmed, and what I should have done, and should have said, how I should have been. And my sponsor said, you just will shoe it all over yourself, don't you? And I used to love to listen to a thing. It was big and round and black, and it was plastic, and it had a little teeny tiny hole in the middle. For you young people, those were called records. And I used to listen to a record, and my favorite song, I know there are some old people here that remember this, it was Peggy Lee, Is That All There Is? Oh, loved it. My sponsor said, we don't listen to that kind of stuff. It's wrist-cutting music. No. And she said, by the way, if AA should have a theme song, be Born to Lose, because that's what we are, born to lose. So I'm just having the best time, feeling sorry for myself. And I get up and I go into the bathroom and I get that window. You know what that window is? That 5 seconds where you look in the mirror and you think, oh my God, it's not them, it's me. There's something wrong with me. And I uttered what I believe is the true prayer of Alcoholics Anonymous. God, help me. God, help me. Now, I had no idea what was going to happen. I had no idea what kind of pain I was going to have to go through, or what kind of trials. You know, it's so interesting about the serenity prayer. We call it our serenity prayer. Well, it's not ours at all. And we took the best lines, and we left the rest. The line after where we stop says, taking hardships as the pathway to peace. And we just ignore that. But that's what life is all about. Taking hardships as the pathway to peace. Now, I'm drinking around the clock and I'm doing crazy things, and my blessed daughter, I was getting ready to have some kind of surgical procedure. She came up and she was with me. And I was having a blackout, and I came to, I was on the bed, and she was sitting on the edge of the bed, and she said, "Mother, what's wrong?" And I said, "I'm an alcoholic." And I had no idea where that came from, except I do know. The God of my understanding had said, she's had enough. We're going to answer that prayer, but in a way that is very, very interesting. And it turned out that she called the 2 doctors that I had, and thank God, doctors take a hard rap in here. But these doctors said, we can't help your mother. You call St. Francis Hospital. There's some women down there that can talk to her. And so my daughter did, and we went in to see this woman, and she talked to my daughter and myself about Alcoholics Anonymous. And I kept thinking, there has to be some other way. I don't want to go. It's all old men. It's like my dad. It's all sick old men. I don't want to go there. Where they had nuts and alcoholics all mixed up together. But I knew who was an alcoholic, and I knew who was crazy. Much like a friend of mine who takes a meeting of AA into a facility like that. And he'll say to the nurse, I'm a member of AA, sort the alcoholics out, I'm going to have an AA meeting. She never looks at a chart or a graph. She just nudges this one and takes this one by the hand. And he finally said, how do you know who's crazy? And how do you know who's an alcoholic? She said, it's really simple. The crazy people sit there very quietly. The alcoholics are always up at the desk telling us how to run this place. And I knew I had my kind of people. I attended my first meeting up on the 9th floor, and a man told his story that he had stabbed his wife in a blackout, and I thought, oh my God, I'm in with drug addicts and murderers. And I said to the nurse, I'm going, and she said, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to faint. And I fainted at my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, but hope was born. A neighbor came. She had been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. She said, do you want to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous? And a strange word came out of my mouth, yes. And I went, and I told you, I fell in love with you people. I was fascinated. I got a sponsor. I got a home group. I was the cookie chairman. I was the cookie chairman for 6 months. I put them out, beautifully displayed them, but you weren't supposed to eat them. They looked too nice. And I saw those steps, and you all started bugging me about those steps, and I thought, you don't understand. I have a slight case of alcoholism. I don't have to do it. And you bugged me more about working those steps, and I said, you don't understand. My dad was in Alcoholics Anonymous. I should be grandfathered in. Yes. And I was full of yes, but. Yes, but. Now, here's the other profanity. My sponsor said, MaryAnn, yes, but is the mating call of assholes. And so I didn't say yes, but anymore, because now I know what that means. So don't any of you say yes, but to me, because I know exactly what you are. Now I'm going to tell you about my character defects. I have terrible character defects, you know, of how I look. I spend an inordinate amount of time, money, energy, getting, giving, folding, putting together, hiding, all the stuff that women do. Scuffing new shoes out on the concrete so they look old. All that stuff. And so how I look is very important. Well, I love AA, and I'm getting ready to go, and I learned how to get down on my knees in the morning and ask for help. Then I would make a sober contact, and it wasn't somebody who had the same amount of sobriety that I did. It had to be somebody that was an old-timer that I really didn't particularly like. and that I had to talk to them. I had to do some reading of our literature. And then I had to attend a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then if I had made it through that day, I got down on my knees and I said, thank you to a God. You know, we talked about this. AA is the only form of transformation that says, give us your actions and we will change your thinking. In everything else, it's you come and we'll work on your thinking and then you'll change your actions. AA said, we really don't care what you think. We care about what you do. And so anyway, this is this wonderful time, and I'm out there running, and I came in, and that's when I did my meditating, and I came in, and I had to shower, and the only way I can explain this day is it was a good hair day. And my sponsor had gotten after me that I needed to pray about this character defect of vanity is what it is. But be careful what you pray for. So it was a good hair day, and this thing went up, and I was putting the makeup on, and it was doing well. And then I thought, you know, I was going to a noon meeting, and I thought, I've got this dress. I really wanted this dress. And it was made out of silk, and it had an A-line skirt, which meant it went like this. And if you walked just right, the silk would sway to the left, and then it would sway to the right. And I practiced that walking. And so I go to my meeting, and I realized when I was doing all this, you know, you may be a grandmother, but you can still turn a few heads. I remember thinking, and then I said, my gosh, MaryAnn, you just prayed a prayer about vanity. And I'm like Scarlett O'Hara, we'll deal with that tomorrow. I go to my meeting, and it's a wonderful meeting, and afterwards I go to the bathroom, and then I visit with my friends, and I'm not that drunken housewife that stays home anymore. I am out there on the street, and I am doing stuff, and I am busy, busy, busy. Oh my gosh, am I busy. And I went to malls, and I went to the post office, and I went to other shopping centers, and I had lunch, and what happened is I realized I was getting an inordinate amount of attention. And the attention went along the line. There were men digging in the street, and they were leaning on their shovel, and they were whispering in each other's ear, and they were pointing at me. And I threw my shoulders back, and I thought, I think I'll walk a little further tomorrow. This walking is paying off. And then there were two little boys on bicycles, and they were so enthralled with the way I looked, they almost had a wreck. And they were whispering in each other's ear and pointing at me, and I said, oh, those young men have good taste. They'll probably marry women who preserve themselves very well. Then there was a man walking in the shopping mall, almost as handsome as Lee, not quite, but almost as handsome as Lee. And he was so enthralled with the way I looked, he had turned around backwards and almost ran into a post. And I was just full of it. And I go to a small shop, and there's my sponsor. You know, it says the frequent contact with each other is the high point of our day. I go up to her, and she says, what is wrong with your skirt? I said, what do you mean, what's wrong with my skirt? And some 4 hours earlier, I had tucked the bottom of my skirt into the top of my pantyhose. And I had been mooning half of Corpus Christi for 4 hours. Now, I watched her face when I tell that, and there was one woman, her jaw just dropped down. And she came up afterwards, and she whispered in my ear, I'm so glad you had on underpants. And I said I didn't have on any underpants. And so consequently, when they talk about bottoms, I have to titter a little bit because half of Corpus Christi has seen mine. The other thing, this is how God works. I told this story yesterday, but it just recently happened. My car had hail damage, and they were working on it, and this lady was so nice, and I would go in there. She would just say how nice I looked, and on and on and on. And I'd just make sure I was all dressed up when I went in there, and I had on something real nice, so she'd say, you know, that I really looked nice. And I picked the car up about 10 days ago, and she said, you know, you remind me of somebody. And I said, oh, I do? And she said, yes. And I gave her a big smile and made sure she had the right angle. I said, I do. And she said, yes, let me think. I think it's somebody on television. Let me think. It's going to come to me. Oh, I have it. Tammy Faye Baker. Went like this. And you know, there is a rule, first rule of holes, H-O-L-E-S. This is the first rule. When you're in one, you stop digging. And she saw my reaction and she said, well, maybe it was another evangelist. And I said, I hope it's not the lady with the pink hair. And so then she said, you know, I haven't seen Tammy Faye for a long time. And I said, no, she's dead. So we have to be careful about what we ask for. So my ego has taken a whooping is what it's taken recently. I finally get sober and I'm just doing wonderfully, except I'm doing no steps. And I came home on a Tuesday night. It was my home group, and my husband said to me, it's not I don't love you, I just can't live with you any longer. And I thought, okay, here it is. Here it is. You see, I had a secret. And my secret was that there was nothing in here. You all used words like character and decency and honesty and integrity. And I knew that I was not within hailing distance of any of those. Courage. And I knew that it wasn't me. I didn't have any of that. See, that was my big secret. I didn't have any of that. But it was Tuesday night, and so I went to my home group. I walked in. I was dressed up. They said, how are you? I said, I'm fine. And later on in the kitchen, I collapsed in their arms and I told them the truth. And I said, I cannot do this anymore. Please help me. If there are people in this room tonight that are going through something where self-sufficiency has just about killed you, it's a blessing. It's a blessing. You grab somebody and you say, help me. I don't understand. How do you do an inventory? You're not going to have to worry about me doing a fifth step. If I write that stuff down, I'll go around the bend. And let me tell you what a member of AA told me. He said, don't worry. Don't worry about it. I said, what do you mean don't worry about it? He said, I've seen it happen. I said, you have? He said, we know what to do if you go around the bend. I said, what do you do? And he said, we hold your hand and we bring you back. We hold your hand and we bring you back. Bob and I were separated for 2 years, and it was exactly what had to happen. Because he was my hook. I hung my alcoholism on him. He did. I was told when I did my fifth step, the person who has the emotion owns the emotion. It's mine. And so I had to be left completely alone to face the demons that I had raised myself. The things that had made a problem drinker out of me in the first place. You know, when I did my fifth step, what I found out were things like this, that God had given me tremendous gifts and talents, and I had refused to use them. That I had used love as a weapon. I would withhold love from people. I would withhold that pat on the back, that praise. I would withhold holding your hand. And I didn't want contact with human beings, because if I let you into my heart, you had power to hurt me. And I didn't want that. I knew I couldn't stand it. And what happened is, after I asked for help, the doors of AA flew right open. Bob left. Yes, he left, and I was by myself. And I started to dig into the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous like my life depended on it, which it did. You know, I used to go to beginners meeting, and there was a woman who said something that sent chills down my spine. The woman I was drank. The woman I was will drink again. So the venue, somehow or another, I have to change. And the only venue, the only avenue for me to change was the working of the 12 steps. That's it. It doesn't make any difference how long I stay away from a drink. If I do not change, I will pick up a drink again. Bob and I got back together after 2 years. He moved me all over the country, and then he said, would you like to move to South Texas? And I said yes, which we did. Well, then I was really worried. I thought, are there any alcoholics in Texas? Is there any AA in Texas? And what happened is my husband and I were very, very careful not to go to those old, ugly places that we had gone to before. We had worked a lot of things out. In the meantime, I'm sober, and if I believe that alcoholism is a disease, I kept looking at my kids. Which one's got it? Who's got it? Who's got it? Well, it didn't take me long. It was my son. And he kept saying, I got it, but I don't want to quit. And I said, well, you know what to do. You call AA when you want to quit. July 19th, 1993, he called me. He was in Tulsa. He said, I've got it and I want to quit. And I said, call AA. And then I had a huge Al-Anon slip. I called the Central Service Office in Tulsa. I asked for the best meetings in Tulsa. I asked for the best men for sponsors. And I got their phone numbers and I called them and I gave them my son's phone number. My son said, you know, all these strange men kept calling me. And my son picked up his 15-year medallion last July 19th. Grandchildren that are the light of my life, and I have to talk about those. You know, I told you about that young woman who was newly married who was with me when I finally admitted I was an alcoholic. And when I was getting ready to go to St. Francis Hospital, she took me into the powder room, and I don't know how long it had been since I'd had a shower or washed my hair. And she took my cheek and my chin in her hand, and she held it up and she said, Mom, let's put a little lipstick on you so you look nice. And I remember looking into her eyes and seeing the eyes of disgust and shame and horror and fear. And I lived with that. And I couldn't sleep when I first got sober. And I would relive that look she had on her face. And what I would say to myself, if I don't ever pick up a drink, I don't ever have to see that look again. So I had taken a negative and turned it into a positive. That young woman is sitting with me tonight, my daughter, Christine. She called her husband and said, well, how are you doing with all those drunks? And she kind of said she's doing fine. My son, I had to turn him over to strangers. Lord, turn him over to strangers. I would hope that there was wonderful AA in Tulsa, and there was. These grandchildren are something I cannot explain. I told you, none of them have ever seen me taking a drink. And the first one was born in Midlothian, Virginia, and I was like a year and a half sober. And I flew down, and they took me up to the nursery, and they had this baby, and the nurse unwrapped her so that she was naked and held her up to the glass. And I said, Jessica Elizabeth Gaylor, you will never see your grandmother take a drink, thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've been able to hold that because God's grace just keeps flowing upon me. I love those children with all my heart. They're grown now. But you know, that part in the book where it says, we quit playing the director, well, I just ripped that page out. About 5 years ago, I got all 5 of them in one motel room in Ocean City, Maryland with my daughter. And you know, it says some of us are in full flight from reality. Well, I thought, well, they're all teenagers, but I'll get all dressed up, and they'll get dressed up, and they'll sit around my ankles, and I'll tell them how I changed their diapers, and how I bought their first teddy bear, and how I rocked them, and I gave them bottles. And I went to their baseball games, and I went to their dance recitals. Well, it was horrible. They kept partying and fighting. It was unbelievable. But what happened is I had a miracle, but it wasn't the miracle I was looking for. Finally, I got a new pair of glasses, and and I realized that I got to sleep with the older one, the one that was the precious one, and I could feel the little balls of her toes. And the boys would let me, they were big boys, and they would let me sit behind them, and we would bond by watching country music videos, and I would scratch their back, and I'd look at those shoulders, and I'd think, these are mine. These are mine. And then there was a little one who loved to put makeup on me and put my hair up in the thing like Bam Bam does and the Flintstones. And then there was one who had long blonde hair, and she would lay her head in my lap and I would stroke her hair. And I wanted time to stop. Those are the miracles. We come in full of low self-esteem. You know how you get self-esteem? You do esteemable acts. And you do little esteemable acts. You say, please, thank you, open the door. Some of you, every one of you, I challenge you, thank somebody that works at this hotel. Acknowledge somebody. Look at their name tag. Call them by name. Make a conversation with them. We are part of this world. The world better be a better place now that I'm sober. You want to know about my program? Ask the clerk at Walmart. You want to know about my program? You talk to strangers. That's what you do. Then you'll find out if I have a program. You'll find out if I'm practicing these principles in all my affairs. God took me to Africa. That was it. Boy, I thought I have done it now. We ended up in Zambia, Africa, and I was 11 years sober, and it's exactly what had to happen to me. You know, there are distractions in Alcoholics Anonymous. When the pain comes from facing something that's wrong with you, there's distractions. I can work with another alcoholic. I can call somebody on the phone. I can go to a meeting. I can watch a movie. I can read a book. I can go shopping. Over there I had none of it. And when I faced me, I had to sit still and hurt and realize that it's my defects of character. They're really assets that have gone awry. And I had to survey the damage of these things. And what happens to a marriage in a foreign country, either it bonds them closer or it rips them apart. I fell in love with that man all over again. I fell in love with him. It was very scary to be there. And I got to go to 2 meetings in 2 years. And I remember thinking, is God going to strike me drunk? No, not the God I found in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was a loner. You know how they talk about loners and internationalists? That was me. I stayed sober. God bless Lee and his kind. I stayed sober on tapes. I would listen to them over and over and over again. I had a resentment, a mile long, and it was all members of AA. And if yours doesn't consist of it, you're not going to enough meetings. I had a terrible list, resented everybody. And you know why I resented them? They stepped on my toes. They called me on my stuff. And I would walk and I'd pray for him and pray for him, and then I'd look up at the moon and I'd think, oh dear God, if I could just see him one more time. If I could just hear that old man say, keep coming back. If I could hear that crazy woman tell her nutty story one more time. And that's what this action does for us. Take the action, the results will follow. You know, we came back after being in Africa, and I had done all the things about the amends to my parents. They were dead by the time I got sober. And the priest had said to me, MaryAnn, when you run along one morning, you say, Mom and Dad, wherever you are, please forgive me. And he said, then this is the thing that ends it. You say, and I forgive you. I forgive you. But it wasn't complete. You keep waiting, and you get a chance to do it. You get a chance to do it. My father-in-law was in a nursing home, and I thought, that's it. That's it. I have to go there every day. The principle involved in the 10th step is perseverance. And every day I went. And every day I'd bring him good news. I'd make sure he was clean and he had candy, and I would make sure that he was well fed, and he told me that I was the best friend he ever had. And when he died, my husband said, you know, MaryAnn, you made the big difference in his life. And I said, no, I didn't. Alcoholics Anonymous. There was a woman there that scared the heck out of me. her name, I forget what her name was, I had a senior moment, but Victoria D'Amico. And she had Alzheimer's, and she scared me to death. She'd pull up my clothes and mess with my hair, and I was so frightened of her. I would go in the back door. And what happened is that I realized that I took my inventory, and my inventory was, I'm scared to death, that's going to be me. I inventoried it. She frightened me because I didn't know how I was going to end up. And I thought A would not be proud of me. And so I would go in every day. I'd go in the front. She'd pull on me. I'd introduce myself every day. And we would have this conversation. And one day I came in and she had makeup on. I said, Victoria, you look wonderful. And she said, well, I wanted you to know you're not the only beauty queen around here. He plays into our fears. Now we get to the good, bad part. The good, bad part. My husband was a heavy smoker, and he finally sobered up under duress. Every morning I would get up early, because I like to do my reading early. And I would get up about 5 o'clock and do my reading. And the kicker to the whole thing is I couldn't get my husband to go to AA. Now, I'm the poster child of AA, and I can't get him to go. Well, and I'd get up and I'd do my reading. Hundreds of books. He would get up at the same time, and he would read the Daily Word, Upper Room, Daily Strengths for Daily Needs. Now, I thought, he's horning in on my time. I got up at 4:30. He's up at 4:30. I get up at 4 o'clock. He's up at 4 o'clock. I said, oh, to heck with it. So I'm sitting there reading mine and looking at him thinking his aren't conference approved, mine are. We had the talk. We moved to Tulsa because I couldn't take care of the house any longer. And we moved to Tulsa because our son is there. And I've been going to meetings in Tulsa for 14 years, so I just slid right into AA there. And we thought maybe we'd have 2 good years. Well, we had 1. And we had a great time. The kids they were in college, the 2 there were in college, and they'd bring their friends over, and I'd feed them, and my grandson would call and say, can I bring one more, Grandma? This one doesn't have any money. And I said, sure, bring them over. At one time, I was standing in the kitchen with about 4 of them, and Bob looked at me and he said, you know, you look like a midget with those 4 big boys around you. It was like cooking for the farm again, and it was wonderful. And Bob got to feeling pretty good. He was doing pretty well. And then he started on the downhill slide. And we had the talk. We'd had the talk, and we'd gone through his clothes. He wanted to be cremated, and so consequently, he didn't need the white shirts anymore, and we could get rid of the suits and all those things. And on Christmas 2006, I was able to get up to, he was in skilled nursing then for a while, and I was able to get up to Christine's for about 3 days, and came back and went right to the nursing home, and there he was. He was sitting in the wheelchair, and he had pressed jeans on. Here's this man, and he's got this big cowboy buckle, and he's got this nice clean shirt on. He looked so good, and his face just lit up when I walked in the room. And I said, and he had the new shoes on that I bought him, and he just looked wonderful. I said, you look great. And he said, I wanted to look good for you. And the next morning they called and told me that they had taken him to intensive care. And I went up there, and the nurse said his lungs are getting very, very tired. And you know what I learned to do? I got on that telephone and I said, help me. Come help me. I can't stand up. You have to hold me up while I go through this. Help me. Come on, come up to the hospital. Help me. And they did, and they held me up while I went through this. We had a magnificent doctor. They said, turn off that monitor. You're in enough pain. And he said, don't you worry, MaryAnn, about these clouds. The angels can still fly. Don't worry about it. He said, you get up in that bed and you lay alongside him, and you get in his ear and you whisper to him, and you tell him that he has been the love of your life, and that He has given you a wonderful life, and that it has been, go on, Bob, it's okay. When you see the light, run to that light. I'm going to be okay. I've got AA. I've got our son, my daughter. I'm okay. Go on, honey. It's all right. Go on. At one point, there were 7 women in the room besides my daughter, and the nurse said, where's your son? And I said, well, he's kind of having a hard time. And she said, well, no wonder with all these sisters. And I didn't try to explain it. On January the 1st, he was afraid of 3 things. He was afraid he was going to be gasping. He was afraid he was going to be in pain. And he was afraid he was going to be alone. And none of that happened. None of it happened. January the 1st of 2007, he made his transition. He said, I want to be cremated. I said, where do you want me to sprinkle the ashes? He said, I don't want you to sprinkle them anywhere. I said, what do you want me to do with them? He said, I want you to bring me home. And I went, oh, I'll have to make sure I get an urn that really looks nice then. And then I said, you know what, I think I want to be cremated. And he said, well, maybe we can share the same urn. And I said, no, I want my urn. And my daughter said, what are you supposed to do? And I said, you're supposed to put us out on the mantle, keep us dusted, don't put me in a closet, I'm going to see what's going on, and who's doing what to whom. And so it was a very hard thing to do. But let me tell you, my husband died 10 days short of he and I being married 54 years. About that sick old man that I wouldn't take care of as my father. God gave me another chance, and I did one heck of a good job. I took care of him. I was a wonderful caregiver. He had been really, really sick since '92, and especially for the last 6 years. He used to tell me, MaryAnn, you are a wonderful caregiver. You're just magnificent. He said, you do something that I know nobody else could do. And I thought, oh, I'm sure it's something like, I'd get into the emergency room real fast. And he said, you know what you do that's better than anybody else? He said, you give the best enemas. You men are a little touchy back there. Anyway, your marriage vows that your marriage is in sickness and in health. Alcoholics Anonymous taught me how to be true to my marriage vows. You didn't know you talked to all that, did you? What you do. We're going to close with a song. And I'm not a very good singer, but we're going to try. Now, you look like those of you that are down in the overflow, I better hear you up here, too. It was written by Patrick White. Sobered up in California. He told him we were going to write an AA song, and so he wrote one. And he gave me permission to use it. So I'm going to sing it once, and then you all can join in. Are you ready? Now, listen very carefully. The words are difficult. Oh, thank you, God. Oh, thank you, God. Oh, thank you, God. Oh, thank you, God.